Let's move now to Israeli politics. Less than a month to go until Israel heads back to the polls on March 23rd. It's the fourth national election in just 2 years. And while it may feel to many Israelis that it's been one never-ending election season, this particular cycle does have many new plot points, many new intriguing elements that can forever reshape Israel's political map. One burning question on the minds of many voters tonight: what does Beni Gantz and the Blue and White Party hope to achieve in the upcoming vote? To talk about that and more issues, with me here in studio is Ruth Wasserman Lande, Knesset member with the Blue and White Party. Thank you so much for being with me. You've been a Knesset member, right, twice over in this time, because you were sworn in, then you had to go, and then you came back. So you've had two swearing-ins in a short time frame.
The wonderful intricacies of Israeli politics.
Yeah. But you are a Knesset member, and again, hoping to go back after the March vote. I want to ask about something Beni Gantz, the party leader, has repeatedly said. He is acting only in the best interests of Israel, not for personal pride, not for ego or ambition.
I think that's very obvious. That's very apparent.
But this party, the Blue and White Party, and 4 out of 5 recent polls, they're polling at the minimum and within the margin of error for not making it into the Knesset altogether. Why is keeping the party alive in the best interest for the country?
Very, very, very simply, not to allow the current government to remain alone or the sole acting role player in the government. And that is extremely important for democracy. That's not to say everything they're doing is wrong. No, nothing is black or white. But democracy and the pluralistic and the liberal vision of this government is the way that it is, because Blue and White is part of that government. In other words, in a very complex, not optimal situation where there are a lot of offices, a lot of ministries, and a lot of bureaucracy surrounding every decision, yet the better interest of Israel is being served because the Blue and White Party is stopping one-sided, a-democratic steps.
So then what do you make of the letter sent to Beni Gantz by 130 former top military officers and commanders? These are men and women that Gantz, some of them he fought alongside of, saying that you need to step aside, that there's a risk of all of these votes going to waste because you're so close to not making it in. The party should be disbanded. It's coming from some of Beni Gantz's top former IDF commanders.
First of all, we're talking about a list of people that I deeply respect. Everybody has a right to their own opinion. This is a democratic country, and the pluralistic views of very many citizens is we accept it with open arms. That's the whole aspect of the story. Yet there are other people, there are other generals and high-ranking people and officers in the IDF that support Beni Gantz, and they've been very loud about it as well. So everybody is entitled to their own opinion. I think that there is a critical role that Blue and White is currently playing at its own expense at times politically for the better and safer future of this country in terms of being intact, in terms of serving the better good of the people in general.
I want to turn now to the issue of Iran, which is something that Beni Gantz, the defense minister and alternate prime minister, touched on in a military ceremony last night. Here's what he had to say about the situation with Iran's nuclear program.
Iran is first and foremost a problem of the world and also of this region, but certainly also a direct threat to Israel. That is why we must work together with our partners, together with the United States, with European countries, and with our new partnerships in the Middle East. And we must make sure that if an agreement is signed with Iran, it will be one that will stop the Iranian nuclear program and will allow effective and long-term supervision and will lead to the end of the Iranians' establishment in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. Most importantly, the IDF is operating in parallel to this, and the IDF is preparing for a situation in which we will have to launch operational plans to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.
Defense Minister Gantz mentioning parallel roads, that we must work with our partners, must work with America and this new administration, and also the IDF has to do its own thing and prepare to strike. What is the role, do you think, of the Blue and White Party and the defense minister in making sure Iran doesn't get the atomic bomb?
I think that the obvious experience that Beni Gantz has in terms of defense issues is needless for me to repeat, but he was the chief of staff. He has tremendous experience in this field. And I think that his added value in terms of serving the security and the future security, strategic future security of Israel is key. Obviously, we have to cooperate with the American new administration. There's no doubt about it. He emphasizes it all the time, and so do all of us. And yet we need to make sure that both Israel and the Gulf countries, the countries with which we have a newly found on the table, sort of, so to speak, friendship, strategically speak to the Americans and are within the framework of any negotiations and any talks that relate to the future or the strategic future security-wise.
But isn't it fair to say that Prime Minister Netanyahu is just ignoring Beni Gantz when it comes to situations in the Middle East? He's not involving Gantz in discussions for these peace deals. He's leaving the country, not telling the defense establishment. He's making deals behind Beni Gantz's back. I mean, this is happening.
I think we opened this interview with saying that I entered the politics, I left the politics, I entered the politics again because of the intricacy of the coalition system. Politics is politics. I cannot represent the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whether he does involve the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Defense, or other ministers. That's his choice. The question is much larger than that. We are talking about a macro strategic look at the region as a whole and Israel in particular in terms of future strategic security. This is no small thing to talk about. And we need to be within the framework of the picture in all the steps leading to any kind of negotiation or acceptance or going back to the deal with Iran. And this is the key issue, together with our newly found partners in the Gulf.
I want to ask about the Israeli-Arab vote, and I know your work with the Arab-Israeli community. The Arab-Israeli vote being courted across the political spectrum by Israeli parties. Perhaps it's this vote that will indicate whether blue and white gets across the threshold or not. How important is the Arab vote to you, and what issues would you address for this community?
Okay, first of all, the Arab community in Israel, and I've been saying this for over 15 years, is key. 22% of the country's population. As a staunch Zionist, I can tell you that this is a part and parcel of Israeli civil society and needs to be addressed, whether in infrastructure, in education, whether in inclusion in terms of sustainable sources of income, diversification of employment opportunities, and so on. This is critical. Like with the Haredi communities, the Arab communities tend to be socioeconomically, in general, not all of them, on the lower spectrum, and we need to make sure that there's real inclusion. This is for the betterment and the, I would say, safety and continuation of Israeli society prosperity in general. All parties are currently, let's say, running after the Arab vote because they finally understood that 22% of the population is something to think about and not something to sort of discard. Is there a happiness, I would say fulfillment by the Arab population with their own Arab representatives in the Knesset? No, the answer is no. There's a huge disappointment, and therefore there'll be a lower vote turnout for them. I think that the current Prime Minister has been very active in separating the different parts of the Meshutefet, or the party which truly encompassed all of the representatives of the Arab street, even though they had really nothing to do with one another. He managed to separate them, which means that their, I would say, power in the Arab street has lessened tremendously. And therefore, this is an opportunity for the Zionistic Jewish parties, to a degree,